Hello, I'm Alex Gupta with UATV. Today I'm speaking with Mr. Emmanuel Cohen. He is the chairman of the RM Group in London.
Hello, Alex.
Hello, Mr. Cohen. Welcome back to UATV.
Alex, nice to see you again.
Good. Let me ask you, are business owners such as yourself, small, medium-sized business owners, are they coming back into Ukraine? Or did they ever leave?
I'm sorry, I've just lost you. Could you repeat that?
Are small and medium-sized international businessmen, such as yourself, are you coming into the Ukrainian market? Are you opening up businesses? Are you investing? People such as yourself?
Yes, I think what's happening is that we're dipping our toe back into the Ukrainian market. We're starting to look at the possibilities. It seems to be slowly stabilizing. It's not normal. It's an abnormal situation in Ukraine. There is definitely issues and a crisis, but in a sense, people appear to be living with it. So it allows for certainly the exploration of investment.
What scares you the most? Is it the conflict or is it corruption?
Well, we work on a smaller basis, so we're a small and medium-sized business. So that's we won't really come across so much of the corruption. I think the corruption hits more of the larger businesses that are from outside of Ukraine coming in, or Ukrainian businesses internally have real issues with corruption and the problems with share raiding.
Really, you don't have any problems with corruption as far as, getting money out of the country, dividend. You don't have any problems with that.
Right, and that's different. I mean, what you're saying is completely different things there. Okay, there are if we have a contract paid, as long as we supply all the data and the documents, etc., then there's no problem at all. I mean, obviously, we don't come across so much of the corruption ourselves, because the kind of people we deal with are directly with businesses. But those businesses, I would assume, have major problems when you're potentially dealing with government officials.
But there's nobody, you never have to pay people off. There's no bribery, anything like that.
Don't have that kind of business. We're not in that kind of area. We supply business information, for instance, and legal services. So people either need them or they don't. We don't pay people to take anything. I mean, that wouldn't be allowed anyway, because we follow UK rules on this, and we have to be really, really careful. We do full due diligence on any kinds of clients we take on as well. So we wouldn't take on in high risk areas anyone who's a PEP, politically exposed person, for instance, and especially not on sanctions lists. So we've got to be really, really careful when dealing with places like Ukraine and anywhere in East Europe, but also when we deal with people in Asia. So it's not any different. We have to make all the checks.
Wouldn't you agree, foreign businesses or foreign investment in Ukraine, they need foreign investment. We hear a lot about the IMF, World Bank, providing loans to Ukraine, and that's great. But the only thing that's really going to get Ukraine going is foreign direct investment. Would you agree?
Correct. Absolutely. It was happening before the recession. When the recession came in, which was compounded by the crisis, basically, in East Ukraine and Crimea, and it's caused an instability. And whenever you have instability, people are afraid to invest. That's the bottom line.
Do any of your other businesses in your peer group, are they involved in Ukraine? Are there Ukrainian-based businesses which are in your line of work?
Yes, we're a law firm as well. So, I mean, we have there are lots of lawyers and very good lawyers in Ukraine, some really, really good businesses who work internationally as well. I mean, Ukraine, before the crisis, one of the growing economies in the whole of Europe. So, I mean, those companies were everywhere and doing really well and expanding. And we still get mail-outs from them, so they're still around.
I wanted to ask you about the privatization of agriculture. The IMF is stressing that Ukraine privatize their agriculture so people can buy and sell to companies and entities. What do you think about that?
Well, Ukraine has 30 million plus hectares of arable land. I think it accounts for about 25% of the arable land in the whole of Europe. It also used to be the breadbasket of the old Soviet Union. Unfortunately, only commercial organizations find the efficiencies to develop any kind of industry, especially farming. I live for instance, in an area of the UK, which is east of England, and that's the breadbasket of the UK, and it's a sort of similar kind of place. And we don't have the fertility on our land that Ukraine does. However, to make that efficient, licenses, sales of land, all has to go through. And it has to go through in a way that is not corrupt. It has to go through in a way where people are not disenfranchised, where people have the ability to grow it, so it doesn't go to a small group of large companies or, for want of a better word, an oligarchs. And so that it doesn't stay in a small group of people, and it's more spread amongst a large group of people. So you get small holdings, large holdings, and a big mix. And if that's done, and it's done properly and fairly, you'll find that the addition to the economy of Ukraine will be phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
What has prevented the privatization from taking place? Russia has it, other countries have it, Poland. What's prevented Ukraine from getting there?
Well, I think it's political will. And also to try and get all the different parties and people to agree. And on a regional basis, I mean, the will tends to be there at the centre, but it's convincing everybody around the centre and in all the regions to follow the centre. And honestly, Ukraine's a vast country you have the same population as as England, not the UK, as England. And what happens is that you're spread over a much larger area, so it's harder to control. It just is. And I think it's not just in arable land. I think the whole problem's in energy as well, and any large contracts and licensing, etc. Is the will out there in the regions and not corrupt?
Do you think that Ukrainians have become very cynical based on what's happened over the last 25 years with the politics, with the economy in Ukraine?
Well, I can't speak for the Ukrainian people, but people I speak to, everyone tries to live their life, don't they? Everyone has to work around whatever is going on at the time. Ukraine has taken a lot of knocks. You've got 2 million displaced people internally, and that's going to hurt until those people are able to progress in life. And it's a drain on your economy, but those people are a huge workforce and should be tapped.
What are your feelings on Ukraine getting the EU visa regime? Ukrainians allowed to travel throughout the EU, visa-free.
Well, I think that's probably one of the best things to happen to Ukraine in a long time. It'll allow Ukrainians to go out to see others in a successful economy. I mean, the EU, for all its issues, for all its problems, is actually a very successful area. Historically and culturally, it allows Ukrainians to see things that they can't see in their own country, and maybe bring ideas back and bring a certain energy back into the Ukrainian economy, in the Ukrainian culture, that will help it to move forward and become really competitive as a country in its own right in the future.
But going back to the business side, what other areas besides Ukraine and East Europe look promising? What other emerging economies in this part of the world do you look at?
Well, as a country ourselves, I mean, we look at former CIS countries. India's a big market for us. China, they're all progressing quite a lot. US as well for data and information. I mean, for instance, we do a lot of work in compliance, and there's a massive raft of regulation that's being enforced worldwide for the good, basically, of the financial services industry to prevent corruption, etc. And we do a lot of work for companies to help them make sure that they comply with all the regulations. And it's a really growing industry everywhere. Okay, and for instance, that the banks of Ukraine, etc., have to be able to make sure that they comply so they can work well with European banks, because European banks won't work with any bank that doesn't follow all the compliance regulations.
I want to ask you about that, the banking sector in Ukraine. What are your thoughts on it? It's gone through a lot of changes in even the last year.
Okay, I mean, I'm not in banking itself, but I can talk to you about sort of the compliance side. Okay. I think they need to really show that they comply properly with all G20 rules that came out back in 2010. And like the EU's bringing out the fourth directive, which starts on the 26th of June, and on money laundering regulations, etc. And, you know, the Ukrainian banks really, certainly the smaller, medium-sized banks, need to really make sure that their whole act has been completely cleaned up. And then they'll move forward. Then everybody will accept and work with them. And that can only help the Ukrainian economy as a whole.
What are your thoughts about Russian banks selling their subsidiaries in Ukraine because of the recent law?
Okay, but I think also some of the Russian banks feel that they're being targeted as well. But okay, you know, banks get sold, banks get bought, things change, markets change, the market adjusts. And going forward over a long time, a long period, you'll find that as the banking system slightly deregulates within Ukraine itself, which it will have to do if it's going to actually grow. If Ukraine is going to grow as an economy, again, banks get bought, banks get sold, and services get brought in, people borrow, people invest, and the economy moves forward. It's a very simple cycle.
How comfortable would you be investing, placing money in Ukrainian banks?
At the moment, probably not very comfortable, I'll be honest. I personally, it's a really difficult one, this one, okay? Because I'm not in the Ukrainian banking system, so I wouldn't really know that much about it. But everyone's really careful these days, okay? Everyone's very wary of what happened in the economic crisis. A lot of people will only put their banks in a safe bank, in a safe country. I mean, the UK itself is really lucky because it was able to ride the banking crisis. And, you know, people always go where their money's safest. And it's not Ukraine at the moment. It's not East Europe at the moment. A lot of it goes to places like the US, like the UK and France and Germany. I mean, Germany is still classed as one really big safe haven for money, so that it's because their economy is so strong, and it's just a fact of life. Money goes where it's safe.
I wanted to ask you about the 2019 elections in Ukraine. Are you following those at all? Are you anticipating that?
Not at the moment. No, we've got our own election here in the UK, which is, in fact, today is the local council elections in the UK. And then in a few weeks, on the 8th of June, we've got the national elections. And there's so much riding on it with Brexit and the economy going forward in the UK. I'm just concentrating on our own election at the moment.
And my final question, I just wanted to ask you about geopolitics. What has to happen between Russia and Ukraine? How does this end? How do we move on? How does peace come?
Okay, well, I'm not going to be able to arbitrate the whole Russian-Ukrainian crisis. But honestly, I mean, I've been reading articles about, they're talking about the Normandy 4, trying to be able to solve it, etc. I mean, Ukraine and Russia are cousins. Okay, I mean, Kiev used to be the original capital of Russia, and you know, until it's solved, until at least they find some kind of middle ground, the two countries, both are going to be affected by it. I mean, Russia is getting sanctions over it. The Ukrainian economy is hurting over it. The people of Ukraine are suffering for it, and people are dying. And really, until a peace comes along, both countries are always going to suffer. And I think getting around a table, talking about it, and trying to solve something is the best way forward for everyone.
Well, Mr. Cohen, I could ask you a million questions. Unfortunately, I will be able to this Saturday in London. But thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
I'll see you this weekend, Alex. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good day. I'm Alex Gupta with UATV. I was speaking with Mr. Emmanuel Cohen. He's the chairman of the RM Group in London, England.